In 1517, an English merchant threw a lavish banquet. He roasted a swan. He served it on silver platters, gilded with gold leaf, to impress his guests. Within a week, he was arrested. His crime? Eating food that belonged to kings. This was not just about a bird. This was about power, about control, about who had the right to taste luxury and who did not. For centuries, monarchs across Europe and Asia did not just rule land and armies. They ruled dinner tables. They passed laws that made certain foods illegal for commoners, no matter how rich you were, no matter how much gold you had in your coffers. If you were not born noble, you could not eat like one. These were not suggestions. These were sumptuary laws, legal codes enforced with fines, imprisonment, and public humiliation. They told you what color you could wear, what spices you could season your food with, and what meat you could serve at your wedding. But why? Why would a king ban butter, or outlaw a fish, or make it illegal to hunt a wild boar in your own forest? Because food was never just food. It was a language, a weapon, a symbol of everything you were, or everything you could never be. Today, we take for granted that anyone can buy saffron, or order lobster, or roast whatever bird they please. But there was a time when eating the wrong dish could ruin your life. So what were these forbidden foods? What made them so dangerous that kings locked them away behind laws and threats? And what does it say about power? That even flavor had to be controlled? Let's uncover the truth. To understand why kings banned food, you have to understand medieval Europe. This was a world built on hierarchy: god, king, noble, clergy, merchant, peasant. Every person had their place, and that place was carved in stone, or so the nobility wanted you to believe. But by the 13th and 14th centuries, something was changing. Trade routes opened. Merchants grew wealthy. The Black Death killed so many people that labor became valuable. Peasants could suddenly demand wages. For the first time in history, commoners had money, real money, and they wanted to spend it. They built grand houses. They wore silk. They hosted banquets with multiple courses and exotic spices shipped from distant lands. They ate like nobles because they could afford to. This terrified the aristocracy. If a merchant could dress like a duke, if a tradesman could feast like a baron, then what made nobility special? What justified their power, their land, their control over armies and laws? The answer, they decided, was sumptuary laws. These laws were enacted across England, France, Scotland, and much of Europe. They regulated everything from fabric to feasting. In 1363, King Edward III of England passed a statute that spelled out exactly what each social class could eat. Cardinals were allowed 9 dishes per meal, dukes and earls 7, knights could have 4, merchants, no matter how to, rich, were restricted to just 3. Each dish was precisely defined: 1 swan, 1 peacock, 4 smaller birds, 12 larks. The laws even controlled spices. Saffron, the golden threads worth more than gold, was reserved for royal tables. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger, all monitored, all restricted. But it was not just about luxury. It was about control. Wild game, venison, boar, even rabbits, were protected under forest laws. Kings claimed entire woodlands as royal property. If you killed a deer on noble land, even to feed your starving family, you faced brutal fines, imprisonment, in extreme cases, execution. There is a story from 1327. A man named William of Wycombe was caught snaring rabbits in a bishop's forest. He was tried, humiliated publicly, and fined more than a year's wages for rabbits. This was not about conservation. It was about sending a message: your hunger does not matter. Your survival does not matter. What matters is knowing your place. And then there were the truly symbolic foods. Swans. These elegant white birds were not just protected, they were sacred. They belonged to the crown. To roast one without royal permission was not simply poaching, it was treason, an insult to the throne itself. Even color was regulated. Tyrian purple dye, made from thousands of crushed snails, could only be worn by emperors and senators in ancient Rome. The cost was staggering. The color would not fade. And so it became law. If you are not royalty, you cannot wear it. So what exactly were these foods that history locked away? These are the 7 foods that were once banned by kings. Not because they were poisonous, not because they were sacred in a religious sense, but because they were powerful. Each one on this list represented something that threatened the order of society. Luxury, status, access to nature, control over trade routes. Even the color on your plate could mark you as an enemy of the throne. Sumptuary laws were not just about food, they were about identity. If you could eat like a noble, you might start thinking like one. And that, to a medieval king, was unacceptable. These laws were enforced by royal foresters, sheriffs, and local magistrates. Violations were publicly recorded. Fines were steep. In some cases, offenders were paraded through town, their crimes announced to humiliate them and warn others. But here is what is fascinating. These laws rarely worked. People broke them constantly. Wealthy merchants bribed officials. Poachers risked execution for a taste of venison. Black markets flourished. Because even under threat of punishment, people wanted what they could not have. Food became rebellion, and kings knew it. That is why they kept passing new laws, adjusting penalties, expanding restrictions. It was an endless battle. The rich wanted to eat like royalty. The royalty wanted to stay separate. And food was the battlefield. So what were the 7 foods that sat at the center of this struggle? Some were meats reserved for ceremony. Others were spices worth more than land. A few were so symbolic that even possessing them was dangerous. Each one tells a story about power, class, and the human desire to taste something forbidden. Food number 1 is roasted swan. This was the ultimate power move at any medieval banquet. Swans were not just birds. They were symbols of grace, nobility, and divine right. In England, all unmarked swans swimming in open waters belonged to the crown, a law that still technically exists today. To kill and roast a swan without royal permission was illegal, punishable, dangerous. But nobles who had the king's favor could serve them at feasts. The birds were roasted, then carefully redressed in their own feathers to create a dramatic visual spectacle. Gilded with gold leaf, they glittered under candlelight. This was not about flavor. It was about display, about showing guests that you had access to something the crown controlled, that you were powerful enough to serve a bird that belonged to the king himself. For commoners, even touching a swan could mean imprisonment. Poachers faced brutal fines, and wealthy merchants, no matter how much gold they had, could not legally serve swan at their tables. It was reserved for those born into nobility. Eating swan was eating power itself. At number 2 is wild boar. Picture this: dense European forests filled with wild boars. Dangerous, delicious, and completely off-limits. Boar hunting was one of the most prestigious activities for medieval nobility. It was considered a test of courage and skill. The animals were aggressive, capable of killing dogs, horses, and men. Hunting them required spears, trained hounds, and nerves of steel. But here is what they do not tell you. If you were a peasant and killed a boar to feed your family, you were breaking the law. Wild game of all kinds fell under forest laws. Kings claimed entire woodlands as royal property, and boars were among the most jealously guarded. The meat was fatty, rich, and available year-round. A roasted boar's head was a trophy, often served at Christmas feasts in castles and manor houses. Commoners who poached boar faced heavy fines or imprisonment. In some cases, repeat offenders were branded or mutilated as a warning to others. This was not about protecting the animals. It was about protecting status. If anyone could hunt boar, then nobility lost one of its defining rituals. So the forests stayed locked, and the boars stayed royal. Food number 3 is saffron. Saffron was not just a spice. It was currency. It was power in powdered form. These tiny crimson threads, plucked from crocus flowers, required tens of thousands of blossoms to produce just 1 pound of saffron. The labor was staggering. The cost? Higher than gold in some markets. Kings across Europe passed laws restricting who could buy, sell, or use saffron. In some regions, only the nobility could season their dishes. With it, commoners caught using saffron faced fines. Merchants who sold it without permits risked having their goods confiscated. But why ban a spice? Because saffron was visible. It stained food a brilliant yellow-gold color. It announced wealth. If a merchant served saffron-spiced dishes at a banquet, guests would know he was rich, maybe richer than the local lord. And that was unacceptable. Sumptuary laws in France and England specifically targeted luxury spices like saffron, ginger, and cinnamon. These were flavors meant for royal tongues, not common ones. Even today, saffron remains one of the most expensive spices in the world. But back then, it was not just expensive, it was illegal. Unless you were born noble, you could not afford the color gold on your plate. Food number 4. Venison. Deer were everywhere in medieval Europe, and yet, most people never tasted venison. This was by design. Under Norman forest laws, all deer in royal forests belonged to the king. This was not symbolic ownership. This was enforceable law backed by royal foresters who patrolled woodlands, investigated poaching, and handed out brutal punishments. Killing a deer, even on land you lived on for generations, was illegal. Peasants caught with venison were fined amounts they could never pay. Some were imprisoned. Others were publicly humiliated, branded, or worse. There is a documented case from the 14th century of a man executed for killing a single stag to feed his starving children. His crime was not theft of meat. It was theft of royal property. Venison was served at noble feasts as a mark of privilege. The meat was tender, flavorful, and rare. But more than that, it was proof you had access to the king's forests, that you had permission to hunt, that you belonged to the ruling class. For everyone else, venison was forbidden, a flavor locked behind laws, forests, and fear. Even hunger was not an acceptable excuse. At number 5 is Tyrian purple shellfish. This one is not about eating the food. It is about what the food produced. Tyrian purple dye came from sea snails. Specifically, murex snails found along the coasts of Phoenicia and the eastern Mediterranean. To create just 1 gram of dye required crushing 12,000 snails. The process was labor-intensive, expensive, and the resulting color was breathtaking. Deep crimson to vibrant purple. It did not fade in sunlight. It lasted for centuries. And so, Roman emperors declared it illegal for commoners to wear. Sumptuary laws banned ordinary citizens from owning clothing dyed with Tyrian purple. Only senators, generals, and emperors could wear the color. It became the ultimate symbol of power. Julius Caesar wore a purple toga. Roman senators had purple stripes on their robes. If you were caught wearing Tyrian purple without authorization, you faced punishment, public humiliation, fines, even exile in extreme cases. This was about controlling access to status symbols. If everyone could wear purple, then what made emperors special? The dye was so expensive that it was literally worth more than gold by weight, and the law ensured that only the elite could afford it, because only they were allowed to have it. Tyrian purple faded from history after the fall of Constantinople in 1204, but for over a millennium, it was the forbidden color. Food number 6 is whale and sturgeon. Here is something strange. In England, whales and sturgeons are still legally owned by the Crown. This law dates back to 1324, during the reign of King Edward II. A statute declared these creatures royal fish, meaning that any whale or sturgeon caught within 3 miles of UK shores or washed ashore belonged to the monarch, not to the fisherman, not to the port, to the king. Why? According to legal scholars of the time, these fish possessed superior excellence that made them uniquely suited for royal tables. Sturgeon, in particular, was prized for its size and flavor. Whales provided massive amounts of meat and valuable oil, but it was also symbolic. These were the largest, rarest catches. By claiming them, the Crown reinforced the idea that the greatest treasures of land and sea belonged to royalty by divine right. Even today, when a sturgeon is caught in British waters, it is technically sold with the understanding that it could be claimed by the monarch, though in practice, it is usually accepted as a gesture of loyalty and then released back to the fishermen. For centuries, though, this law was enforced. Fishermen who kept royal fish faced fines and legal consequences. Even the ocean had a class system. And finally, food number 7 is peacock. Peacocks were not just eaten, they were performed. Like swans, peacocks were status symbols. But they took it further. At grand feasts, a roasted peacock would be brought out, refeathered in its full plumage, beak gilded, tail spread wide in a shimmering display of color and wealth. This was theater. This was power made edible. Sumptuary laws across Europe restricted who could serve peacock. In England's 1517 law, peacocks were reserved for cardinals, dukes, and bishops, the highest ranks of nobility and clergy. Lower classes, even wealthy merchants, were forbidden from serving them. But here is the twist. Peacock meat was not particularly delicious. It was tough, gamey, sometimes described as unpleasant. But that did not matter. No one ate peacock for flavor. They ate it to show off. The bird was expensive to raise. It required space, care, and feeding. And then the preparation, roasting it perfectly while preserving the feathers, required skilled kitchen staff. It was a logistical and financial flex. Commoners who served peacock without permission faced fines and social scorn. They were accused of aping their betters, of pretending to be something they were not. Because in the medieval world, even your dinner had to know its place. So what do all of these foods have in common? They were not banned because they were dangerous. They were banned because they were symbols. Each one represented access to land, to trade, to status, to power itself. And kings understood that if they lost control over these symbols, they lost control over the story of who deserved to rule. Food has always been more than nutrition. It is identity. It is culture. It is the language we use to say, "I belong here," or "I do not." Medieval sumptuary laws tried to freeze that language in place. They tried to make sure that no matter how much money a merchant earned, no matter how successful a tradesman became, they could never eat like nobility. Because if they did, the entire social order might collapse.